Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So, today we are going to talk about Biden, his statements, some small changes in language that actually make a pretty big difference. We will talk about the response to these statements, and then we will go over one message from somebody who disagrees but makes a really good point in the process. Now, most of this, if you have been following the coverage on this channel, short version, a lot of the stuff that we have been talking about as happening behind the scenes is now super public. It's out in the open. It's not behind the scenes anymore. Okay, so Biden has basically said if they go into Rafa, that they're not going to get U.S. support. Okay, we've already talked about this, but now it is very public. There are, let's call them delays when it comes to supplies. It looks like 2,500 pounders, maybe some 155s. Short version, if you don't know what any of this stuff is, U.S. boom. U.S. supplied boom. And the general tone is that if they go into Rafa, they don't get U.S. boom. Now, when it comes to going into Rafa and what that means, initially that language was large-scale ground offensive. And then there was the plan that was presented by Netanyahu's team that divided it up. So it wasn't actually, technically, a large-scale ground offensive. I'll put the video down below if you really want to hear about it in detail, but the short version is, I think I called it a distinction without a difference. Sure, it is no longer a large-scale ground offensive, but it doesn't actually accomplish the goal of mitigating civilian harm. So, a slight change in language, for those who watched the video over on the other channel this morning, has occurred. They're no longer saying they can't have a large-scale ground offensive. They're saying they need to stay out of population centers. That is a distinction with a difference. That is more in line with what was trying to be accomplished. Now, it does change some things though, because if Netanyahu was to order an operation that went into the outskirts of Rafa, okay, it might not actually break the rules because it's not part of the population center. We're talking about, like, let's say they go into an outskirts area where there's not a lot of people. That would be going into Rafa, but it wouldn't actually be violating what the U.S. has said. So be aware that that might happen. But restricting it around population centers is way better than just saying you can't do a ground offensive. There's not a lot of easy ways or semantic ways to get around staying out of population centers. Another thing that is worth noting is that it appears the U.S. is kind of pushing small diameters. If you don't know anything about this stuff, just think of how they're described. 2,000 pounders and small diameters. One is really, really big, the other isn't. The U.S. seems to be pushing these, saying, why don't you go this route with it? That is most likely something that is also signaling the U.S. is pushing for a doctrine shift, basically telling Netanyahu to engage in realignment or shaping, going after the leadership, rather than trying to fight an unconventional opposition force conventionally. This is the same advice that the U.S. general gave when he went over to advise 6 months ago. The use of small diameters would mitigate civilian harm immensely, even if there was a higher frequency of their use, it would be less harmful to civilians. Okay. I know that some of Netanyahu's advisors advised that 6 months ago. I don't know how they're going to view this suggestion today. And I have no idea whether or not Netanyahu will listen to it. Okay, but that's something else that's occurring. Now, what has Netanyahu said? What's the response? Short version, he and one of his close advisors have basically said, we have what we need to go into Rafa. When we're going to do what we're going to do, we'll stand alone, we'll do whatever we want, even if we have to do it by ourselves. I would imagine that right now he has a room full of advisors probably saying, sure, we have the munitions to do this, but we don't have the munitions to do that and deal with any potential counterattack. And they're probably trying to talk him out of it. However, we don't have a long history of Netanyahu listening to his subject matter experts over the last 7 months or so. So no clue what's actually going to happen with that. So the short version here is the stuff that we have been talking about behind the scenes is now out in the open, very public, to include Biden basically saying, we're going to give you the Iron Dome and defensive stuff, but nothing else. Specifying, once again, the Iron Dome. So that's where it sits right now. Everybody is puffing out their chest, waiting for somebody to back down. I don't know how that's going to play out. Okay, moving on to the message. And again, this person, you'll see pretty quickly, doesn't actually agree that Biden is trying here. But there's an interesting development in the message. Okay, irrelevant part. I left the military a while ago. Have 2,500 pounders changed? You liberals will fall for anything. It just shows you how much Biden is lying to you and why you need to come to Team Trump. I don't see how this is even remotely sending a message at all. They don't even need these. You don't even use those in urban areas, especially the 2,000 pounders. You, sir, are correct. You are correct. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, you do not use 2,000 pounders in densely populated areas where there are civilians present. You are correct. That is not something that I'm imagining what you were trained, it would be okay. And you are so close to getting it. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.